willkommen to our baking series finale. So I'm so excited to bake with you all one more time, and this will be the last video that Ashley and I make for the baking series. With the adult summer reading program that's happening right now, it's all about different heritage stories and especially the African American experience in Pueblo and the history behind that. And so I wanted to make something really special for the last baking video, and it is all tied to part of my heritage story. So especially on my dad's side, we have a lot of German heritage, and because of that, I've been learning and speaking German and trying my best to practice and learn it since high school. And I also got to have an amazing experience in high school where I did a German exchange program. So we had some German students that came to America, and then us as American students got to go over to Germany as well. And my host family, the Lederles, were the best people ever. I had so much fun in Germany. I learned so much from them. And my friend Sophie and I, who we were exchange students together, we are still very, very close best friends to this day. So it's really important to me. Germany is a really wonderful place that I've gotten to experience, and it's also really important to my family's heritage as well. And so today I'm going to be baking something about that German heritage and that German experience. Now this recipe also comes from the Lederles, so thank you to Jens, Sophie's dad, for letting me put all of this together and teaching me how to make Kasespatzle. So like I just said, today we're going to be making Kasespatzle. The closest American thing I think we have to it is kind of macaroni and cheese. It's flour noodles in a really cool shape that are very chewy, and it is served with Käse, which is cheese. Sometimes you might also have Spätzle, which are the noodles, without the cheese, but my favorite version of Spätzle is with the Käse. So today we will be making Kasespatzle, and I hope you enjoy this very unique recipe from Germany, and I hope that you take some time this summer as well to explore and celebrate your heritage. So let's first talk about all the ingredients that you will need for Kasespatzle, and then we're also going to talk about the equipment because there's a couple funky things that you might not have in your kitchen already. So for the ingredients to make the dough and then the delicious cheese and onions that go on top, you're going to need flour. You're also going to need salt and water. I have just normal water here, what's called still water in Germany. Usually because they drink a lot of sparkling water and have it everywhere, this would be sparkling water, just seltzer water. So if you would prefer that, go ahead and buy seltzer water instead, but you can also just use still water. We'll also need butter. You can use butter, or preference over normal butter would be ghee. I don't have any of that though, so we're just gonna use normal butter. You're also going to need eggs. Here are all of my eggs. You're also going to need onions, like a normal yellow onion, and then the most important part, your cheese. So a couple things to note, this isn't going to be as exact of a recipe as some other baking recipes. You kind of make it depending on how many people you want to feed. So I'm going to make it as if I was feeding 6 people today, even though it's just me and my husband, because we love Kasespatzle and we will eat enough for 6 people in the coming days. And so depending on how many people you are making it for will change your ingredients quite a bit. For example, 1 onion will work for almost anyone, but if you're feeding a really big crowd, you might need 2 onions. And then the amount of things like flour and salt and water, we will determine based on consistency and texture and how many people we're serving. As for cheese, a couple other things to note when you're selecting your cheese. The stinkier the better. So I have a Swiss Emmentaler right here, which is one that was specifically recommended to me. A lot of kinds of like cheese from Switzerland, France, that kind of thing. If you can get that kind of cheese, it's even better. And we also have one called Vampire Slayer because it's garlic cheddar, and my husband and I really love garlic, so he picked that one out because he wanted it to have more garlic to it. So when you're selecting your cheese, think about it being stinky. Really European cheeses are great. Of course, if you just only had like shredded cheddar in the house, I'm sure it would still be delicious. But the noodles are quite bland. They don't have a lot of flavor on their own. So it's really the cheese and the onions that add a lot of the flavor to it. So keep that in mind when you're selecting your cheese, and let's move on to the equipment that you're going to need. One other thing that I wanted to mention is this is a family recipe from Jens. So that's another reason why it's not as specific as some other recipes you might find online. It's just kind of one of those things where they've made it so often that they know what it's supposed to look like, but that makes it pretty special because it's specifically from this family. So now let's talk about the equipment that you're going to need. There's a couple things that you probably will have, and one thing that I will be very surprised if you already have in your kitchen to make Kasespatzle. The first couple of things, you're going to need a big mixing bowl to mix the dough together, and you're also going to need either a hand mixer, a stand mixer, or very strong arms. You'll also need a strainer, kind of like this. A colander might work, but if you can get a strainer with smaller holes in it, that'll work a lot better. Or if you don't have that, you can use a slotted spoon. You'll also need a grater if your cheese isn't already grated, because we need to grate that. And then two funky things that you might need is a food scale, and you probably already have that. In this, you'll especially need a food scale if you want to do it with the grams that I'm going to do today. So most of the stuff that we'll measure out will either be by eyeballing the texture or with grams. If you want to, you can convert it to cups instead, but I have a food scale and I cook a lot of things, bake a lot of things that have grams, so I'll just use a food scale to measure it out that way. And then here's the thing that I will be very surprised if you have it in your kitchen already. So this is a Spätzle maker, and you can find these online. Jens said that the Tupperware brand was the best. He liked that one personally, so keep that in mind when you're looking for one. A lot of them look like this, so it's kind of like curved, and then it also comes with a spatula tool, I guess you would say. And what you do is you pour the dough, you lay it flat over boiling water, you pour the dough over these holes, and then you move it back and forth like this to actually form the Spätzle noodle. Some other ones look a little bit more like a cheese grater, where it's kind of has a block, and you move the block up and down like this full of dough. Whatever one that you can get online, they're pretty inexpensive, but it is kind of a funky thing that not a lot of Americans have in their kitchen. But it's really awesome, and I think you're gonna like Kasespatzle, so if you think you're gonna be a fan of it, it's definitely worth the investment. A couple other things that I don't have here in front of me, you're going to need 2 pans. One of them, you want it to be like the biggest pot you have, because we're gonna fill that with boiling water to make the Spätzle noodle. And the other one you want is just a normal pan, but you want to make sure it has a lid on it, because that's where we're going to be caramelizing the onions. You also want some kind of baking dish or serving dish that's oven safe, because this is some of the magic of Kasespatzle is we will put that into the preheated oven, and it'll make everything nice and warm. So as we add the Spätzle and noodle, the Spätzle and the cheese, everything will kind of meld together in this warm deliciousness. So make sure you have an oven-safe serving bowl or dish, baking dish. And if you're really fancy and you have oven-safe ramekins or little individual bowls, add those in too, so it's nice and warm when you're serving it for people in their individual dishes. Okay, let's go ahead and get started making the Kasespatzle. So the first step is to prepare the onion and start cooking it, because as I mentioned, it is caramelized. So we are going to be cooking this bad boy for a really long time until it's nice and brown and sweet. So to get started with that, we're going to cut the onion up. I have a hack right here for cutting onions, and if you haven't seen my how to cook video, this is where I first tried it out and it worked really well. So if onions make you cry a lot when you cut them like me, I think almost everyone has that, but mine, I cry so much. Get a paper towel and wet it. You don't have to have it sopping wet, just wet it and wring it out, and then leave it on your cutting board next to the onion. And the idea is that all of the enzymes or whatever it is in the onion that make our eyes cry are attracted to the moisture in the towel instead of our eyeballs. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this onion into half ring slices, and then I will be back to show you how to put them in the pan and get them going. All right, so we have our onion cut up. I actually cut it up into fourths instead of halves because that was a gigantic onion and the circles were like that big. So I've cut it into fourths and now we are going to get started on caramelizing it. So I have my pan here and I'm going to set it on medium heat. And then I'm going to add the butter to it. So I have in my notes about 8 tablespoons of butter is what Jens recommended. So let's plop that in there. And it's a lot of butter. I think you know by now I like butter and cheese. That makes it all taste good, so. And it'll be really caramelizing the onions and making them really sweet and delicious and buttery, so. Again, it doesn't have to be super exact. You can tell my tablespoons are not all the same at all, but I'm just getting like a general giant chunk amount each time. Okay, so we're gonna do that, and it's already melting beautifully. And once it melts a little bit more, we're going to add our onions in. Okay, I'm going to add our onions in now. Onions. It's so good. Okay. So I'm going to stir it around a little bit right now. You are going to stir the onions occasionally as they caramelize. So I'm just going to stir it once right now to get everything nice and coated. And that is what it looks like. Butter onions. So we're going to put it right here. We're going to put the lid on it and we are going to let it cook and cook and cook and cook and cook. Jens has said before, he's thought before, oh no, I've finally burned the onions, I've done it, but he didn't burn them. They were actually even better then. So I know it seems really weird and kind of counterintuitive, but you want to cook these a long time until you're almost positive that they're burned, and that's when they're going to be delicious and caramelized. Okay, now we are going to preheat the oven and get started on our dough. So you're going to want to preheat your oven to 150 to 180 degrees Celsius. So if you use Celsius, awesome, go for it, but I have Fahrenheit here. And so 180 is 356 degrees Fahrenheit, but we're gonna just go with a solid 350. So go ahead and preheat your oven to 350. And once it's preheated, we're going to put in the serving bowl that we mentioned so it gets nice and warm. Before we get started on the dough though, I do need to go ahead and grate my cheese, so I'm going to do that now. So for the cheese, this is where we get into measuring things depending on how many people you have in grams. And so you're going to want to do about 50 grams of cheese per person that you're serving. So we are technically serving 6 people. We're making enough for 6 people. So we want 300 grams of cheese. I actually have 340 grams here in front of me, but we love cheese. So a little extra grams of cheese isn't gonna hurt us. We're just gonna go ahead and do all of it. And so it depends a little bit on how many people you have, how much cheese you all like, and what type of cheese. If you have a stronger cheese, 50 grams might be enough for you all, or if you're not big cheese fans, you might wanna just stick to the 50 grams. Or if you're cheese monsters like us, go ahead and throw in the extra if you have some extra from the packs that you've bought. So I'm gonna go ahead and shred this, and then we'll get started on making the Spätzle dough. So I've grated the cheese, and now before I get started on making the dough, I'm gonna do a couple of things. I'm going to check on the onions that have been cooking for a bit now, and I'm also going to get the large pot of water. I'm going to start boiling that, because the way that you cook the Spätzle is you plop the dough into the boiling water and it cooks really fast. So I'm going to check on the onions and boil the water now, and then we will come back and actually make the dough. And here's what my onions are looking like. You can tell they're looking a little bit more translucent and also a lot softer. So we are on a great start to these onions, but they are going to cook a lot longer than that. We're gonna add some salt to the water to boil it. Okay, so I am going to get started on actually making the Spätzle dough. So to get started, I have placed the food scale down, and then I've put my bowl on top of it, teared it out so it's 0 and it's not counting the weight of the bowl. And I'm going to put in 100 grams per person of flour. So I'm going to do 600 grams for the 6 people that I'm serving. Oh, so close. I'm at 584. I thought I could maybe just do that bag, but I'll have to open another one. Okay, now I have 639. So sometimes you gotta scoop until you get right to the exact amount. Okay, there is what 600 grams of flour looks like. Now we're going to add in eggs. And you want 1 large egg per person, so I'm going to do 6 eggs. Next up, we're going to put salt in, and my only note for measurement from Jens for salt is add more than you think you need. So I'm just going to dump it out into my hand, and I'm going to do about that much. I would say that's almost a tablespoon, and add that in, and I'll add in a little bit more. We'll say that's like a tablespoon and a half a teaspoon of salt. But yes, add in more than you think you need because it's a lot of dough. And I guess it's important to make sure it's salted. The water is also salted, that's boiling right now. Now this is the trickiest part. We're going to add in our water, so either our still water or the sparkling water, and there's not a measurement for this either. What you want to do with the water is you want it to get to a texture where it's similar to pancake batter, so you might want to use a fork to test it as you're going along. You want it to be kind of like glue, and for it to come off of the fork, but for it to not be too runny. So I'm going to add a little bit in, and then I'm going to pull it off of the food scale, plug in my mixer, and then we'll mix it together and see how the texture is looking. So here's what my Spätzle dough looks like, all mixed up together. So you can see, let me lift it up. I ended up using a spatula a little bit to scrape down the sides, and it'll also be helpful if you have a spatula to actually put it into the Spätzle maker. So this is what it looks like. Pretty good texture, maybe a little bit thick. My husband was saying it's a little thick, but I don't want to go much thinner. So this is a pretty close texture. And just so you know, for 6 grams of flour, or 600 grams of flour and 6 eggs, we used 1.5 cups of water. So just keep that kind of ratio in mind as you're doing yours. As you're going along, if it becomes too thick, if it's still too thick, add more water. If you get past the point that I got to and it's too thin, just add more flour and kind of parcel it out that way until you get to the right texture. So we are all ready. Our water is at a rolling boil. I just checked on the onions and they're looking good. They're still very translucent and still very buttery, so they still have a while to go, but we are going to get started with making the spätzle. The oven is also preheated and I have the baking dish ready. So when you are done with your spätzle dough, you want to have your pot of water boiling. You want to have your cheese at the ready. You want to have your baking dish that you're going to put into your preheated oven ready. And you also want your spätzle maker and your spätzle dough. If you have a buddy, at this point it's really helpful to have one person who scoops the spätzle dough into the spätzle maker and the other one who actually uses the maker to plop the dough into the boiling water. You also will want the slotted spoon or the colander at this point as well, or strainer. So if you don't have a buddy, you can still do it, no worries, but if you do have a buddy, go ahead and grab them and let's make some spätzle. So here's my boiling water, and this is how I'm going to use the spätzle maker. You're going to put it over top like that, so it's resting on the edges of your pot. And if you want to see what our onions look like, that's where they're at. They're looking pretty golden. I might actually stir those one more time before we get started with the dough. I'm going to turn it down. Okay. So this is how you want your spätzle maker to be. One thing I forgot to mention, it is July and it's very hot here in Pueblo. So this is more of a wintertime food, but thank you so much to Jens and Pia for making it for us when it was during the summer. And I'm sure you knew how to make it during the summer now too. So you might sweat a bit, but it's really delicious, I promise. So to use the spätzle maker, we have our dough here, and we're gonna pick up some of the dough and we're going to glob it into the spätzle maker, putting it over the holes. And you don't want to fill it super full because you don't want it to go over the edges, but get a good amount going. Okay, so you have your dough in your spätzle maker, and then you have something that looks like this tool, and you're going to go back and forth, and that is how you make your spätzle noodles. If the spätzle are floating like mine are, that's a good sign. That shows that the dough is good and it's at the right temperature. So when you're done with a round, that was a very small round, but just to show you, this is what they'll look like, and this is when you want to get your colander or your slotted spoon, and you want to take them out of the boiling water and put them into your baking dish. So again, that was a small round, but just to show you what they look like. And then you want to put it into your baking dish. And once you have one layer of spätzle in your baking dish, we're going to cover it with a layer of cheese. And then we're going to put it in the preheated oven to start getting all delicious and melty together. So I'll show you one more time how to use the spätzle maker. And then we'll put a layer of cheese on top. So you take your spätzle maker, put it back over. I might actually try to pour this time, but you don't want to pour too much, so go slow. And go back. This part is pretty fun. And forth. And this is where if you have a buddy to dump it, you can go a little faster because one of you is dumping it and the other one is starting to do this back and forth. But as you can see, you can do it on your own as well. Try to get all of it through there. And then I just put my spätzle maker back over the mixing bowl. It gets some water in it, but it doesn't matter. And all of our spätzle are floating. Look at them go. They look like little tadpoles. And we'll add them to our baking dish. And again, if you don't have a colander, your colander's too big, or for me, like it's hard to trap these little ones when we have a big colander. Oopsie, get out of there. You can use a slotted spoon to grab all the rest of the little ones. Okay, so we have our spätzle in our baking dish right here. That's not quite a layer, but I'm going to show you what you do once you have a layer. Grab some of your cheese and put it over top. And I'm grabbing two different types of cheese. because we have two different types, and just mixing them together. And then in your preheated 350-degree oven, you're going to add the baking dish into the oven. Be careful, everything is very hot at this point. And as you're making your next round, that'll get nice and melted. So I am going to use my husband, the disembodied hand that you've seen before, to help me out so we can go a little bit faster, and I will show you what it looks like at the end with all of the layers done, and hopefully the onions will be close at that point as well. Okay, so our kitchen is quite a mess now, but we are very happy because my husband and I just finished making all of the spätzle. So here we have the beautiful noodles layered with cheese, as you can see. And our onions are also done, as you can see. So usually at home you'll have onions like this, but if you ever get it on like a street market or at a festival or something, they might use these kind of onions, those French onions that we know usually from Thanksgiving. So you can put either of those on top. If that's too much work or you're nervous about blackening onions, feel free to use those French onions instead. And I am going to make this half and half. So I'm going to do half of our blackened onions, and we still have a little bit of butter, so I'm kind of straining it as we go. And these make them really crunchy, so they're kind of like the other onions that we have at Thanksgiving. They're crunchy and crispy and delicious. I'm so excited to eat this. So as you can see with what I have here, it depends on how thick you want your layers of onions. If you just want a kind of a smattering on top, one onion might work. But otherwise, if you want it more covered like how I have it here, you might actually want to use 2 onions for 6 people, because it only covers about half. But I'm going to cover the other half in these, so you can kind of see the 2 styles, if you will, that Kasespatzle is prepared in, with the different onions on top. I remember one of the first times I saw Kasespatzle from like a street vendor with these onions on top, and I was like, wait a minute, because these onions seem so American to me, so it was funny to see them in that context. But they are really good. Okay, so here are our 2 types of onions. Now you want to put it back into the oven for just a little bit, just to let everything get melty and delicious together. And then you can enjoy your Kasespatzle. What Jens suggests to eat it with is a side of like radicchio or lettuce with some balsamic vinaigrette. A nice bitter salad will go great with this Kasespatzle. So I hope you've enjoyed, and I'm going to go ahead and put it back in, and then I am definitely going to eat some of this now because it looks delicious. Thank you for joining Ashley and I on this baking series. We hope you've had so much fun with us, and we've had a ton of fun baking with you and learning from you all as well. So as always, if you make this, please show it to me because I want to see it, and we will see you in the future for lots of other fun programs. Happy baking!